honored to have been asked to do this. Chloe sent me a quick email. She's like, I kind of need somebody to be in conversation with. I jumped. It took me 30 seconds. I was so excited to do this, so thank you for including me in this. So we're going to keep it conversational. We've done a little prep, and I have a few questions. But we want to make sure to give everyone enough time to also ask questions, because many of you have known Chloe for much longer than I have. And so we want to make sure to give enough time for the Q&A. So I guess just starting off, how does it feel?
Amazing. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. This is incredible turnout, and it's a treat to be in New York with my book to share, and this opportunity to speak with you at Rizzoli. Noelle?
Well, so I'm curious, you started this project a long, long time ago, and I'm wondering, did you imagine all of this? Did you imagine, the bookstore, the talk, the book, the gallery shows, all the rest of it?
No. I mean, this started at 22. I had big dreams, for sure, and never pictured 30 years later being here with a book, and with the level of reception that it's received, the enthusiasm and success, really. And so yeah, it's been amazing and exciting and humbling and shocking and like thrilling.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first saw the work on Instagram, I immediately it was like a gut reaction, which many of you all, if you saw the work on Instagram before the book, might have had the same response. I just knew instantly, I was like, this work is important, it's historical, it feels so contemporary. There's something so resonant in it, and so I guess I'm curious about, like, why now? Why do you think that this work is having so much traction, and why do you think people are responding to it in the way they are now?
I think there's a number of reasons. First, there's like a 20-year nostalgia cycle. So the 90s are hot. People love it. They like imagery. They want, to witness life in the 90s or see anything 90s, for one. For two, there's not a lot of queer history documented. There's not a lot of imagery for people to tap into, to be proud of or claim or use as a reference for their own identity, let alone kind of intimate, joyous history, like imagery or documentation. So I think for queer youth, that's huge and important. I have been, I've gotten messages and emails from young people that have surprised me. Here we would think, who wants to see like 30 years ago? But people are fascinated and inspired and excited to have a reference point. Another reason is we're in, I think, a time of really suffocating LGBTQ legislation. Just a lot happening in our country that's horrifying. And so to have a place to turn to show a time before we were this progressed, and a time to show how far, this was a decade. We've come a long way since the 90s, and even if we're taking a few steps back, there's potential by looking at people who fought and struggled to keep moving forward. And I also think in some ways the photos of mostly young people can kind of evoke a sense of people's own sense of youth and freedom and joy, times before responsibilities and careers and kids and burdens in a lot of ways. So just the kind of freedom of youth and flamboyance, I think appeals to people.
I think it's also like pre-technological. So I was born in 1979, right? So like I did see, I felt a tremendous sense of nostalgia when I looked at your pictures, also because you know, I'm raising a 10-year-old child now, and this question of like subcultures or community is so different now. Yeah. And there was this, for me, this like sense of craving and longing for this like warm, physical, embodied kind of community that was in your pictures.
Yes, actually that is a big thing. I think another thing is this book came out after COVID, after quarantine. So people had tapped into a sense of need for community, for safe spaces, for getting, you know, not being isolated. And this is almost like such an expose of that. And in this digital era, it's really hard to, you know, you can lay in bed the entire day and feel like you've seen the whole world on your phone, on Instagram. But back then, no phones, no Instagram, no social media, no, I mean, your only access to seeing other than your small town, your world, your house, was to get up and show up and go somewhere and engage physically. And that's very different now. And I think, you know, even having photographs with no cell phones in it is almost flabbergasting.
Well, you do have like the original Apple iMac. That caught my eye immediately. I was like, oh.
Yeah, a couple pagers in there, pagers with a lot of quarters in our pockets to run to the payphone to respond to the pager. But that's novel. I mean, I've had young people come up to me and say, wow, this is, like, how did you know where to go ever? Or contact anybody ever. And in some ways it's hard to remember. So I look back at photos and I see, I'm like, oh, we had flyer walls, you know, and, you know, we just had this unspoken understanding. You wake up, you go to the Bearded Lady Cafe, eventually you run into everybody, either on your way or there, just start doing things. So it was a very adventurous time, which I think can come with like age, youth, like what are we doing today? We're not going to our day jobs, if we had any. And it was affordable, so we could live like that.
I'm trying to picture you as a bike messenger, actually.
Yeah.
When we did the call, you were explaining to me how, you know, you did what you knew you had to do. You moved to San Francisco, you became a bike messenger.
Yeah.
And you were talking about a lot about the aesthetics of that too. Like, who wants to go home, right? So you've got like your bag and your, you know, cargo pockets.
Everything on you. Yeah, you leave, first of all, there's a lot of hills. So I would have to admit, a significant amount of my bike messengering short career was telling Tanya, my friend here, to come and drive somehow and meet me and save me, or bring me food, or bring me clothing. And pretty quickly I was like, I am not cut out for this. This is hardcore. I need way more pampering than life on a bike. So, but in general, we got around with bikes and walking. San Francisco's small. Like the physical proximity is tiny. So our neighborhoods were the Mission, the Castro, South of Market, Noe Valley, kind of. And so you just walk, you get out, you walk. And when you leave, you usually go down or up a steep ass hill. And so you pack your stuff for the day, because you know, you have everything. You have your messenger bag, you have stuff tied to you, chains on, wallet chains, and combat boots, because at any point, of course, we figured there was going to be a revolution. So we were like ready to fight, ready to be urban, ready to just walk around the streets, being like planning and doing things. And so yeah, everything was, the aesthetic and the fashion was very much that.
Well, also like a general sense of like courage and a willingness to be whoever you are. Because I'm also thinking about, you know, people who might have grown up in smaller towns, or like you'd mentioned, even from larger towns where there wasn't really a queer community, people really came on almost like a pilgrimage or a journey, right? And they came and discovered this and became part of a very intimate community, so.
That's true. I think a lot of people made their way to San Francisco, the known gay mecca, not sure what they were looking for, and got there and realized they found what they wanted and stayed. And I know when I arrived, for so much of what San Francisco and the scene, the kind of burgeoning, creative, scrappy, DIY, women-focused scene, queer scene, was very unique and kind of cutting edge and like forming. And when I got there, I knew, okay, this is where I'm staying. This is where I want to be. And there was, it was a lot of artists, a lot of creative young people. Music was prominent and abundant, and art, sculpture, people, a lot of people thinking it was very self-sufficient. It became very self-sufficient because the enormity of the population was able to sustain our own businesses. Women-owned businesses opened, tattoo shops, cafes, bars, clubs, and stayed afloat because there were enough of us to support it. So it was this kind of strangely insular world that was very unique for the time, and a unique experience for any city, I think.
And people, I imagine, knew you as the photographer, right? Because one of the things that I loved about the pictures is just as a photographer, as a photo editor looking at photographic work, the photographs are incredible. They're well composed, they're technically great, and then of course the emotion and the content of the work all mixed together is like, that's why I was so drawn to it in the first place. But I'm curious about, this is like decades of making. And when we talked, I was just thinking about like, what do the archives look like? Are they in boxes? Are there contact sheets? So I do want to talk a little bit about, the incredible feat of this book coming together, which, when you told me the story, I'm like, oh, like what is the Cliff Notes version of this thing?
Cliff Notes are actual real time, because this happened in months. It was insane how fast this had to unfold. So, in a nutshell, COVID happened, quarantine, everyone's quarantined. Our daughter, who had just started as a freshman year in UCLA, suddenly was moving back into her room. We're like, bye, oh. And so there she was, taking classes, back at the kitchen table. And with all our time home and all our time on our hands, she was like, Mom, I think one of your photos is floating around Instagram and no one even knows who you are or how to tag you. And I'm like, what photo? How do you, I'm not even sure she knew much of my work. And so she was like, we have to up your game. I'm making you an account. And overnight, she became my 18-year-old social media manager and made me an account. And I'm like, okay, well, in that case. So I started scanning because we were home, and I opened the archives of, all negatives, contact sheets when I was feeling organized, and as years progressed, less and less contact sheets. Mostly in hard binders, photo binders, and just started scanning and posting, and the response was exponentially exciting. Every day, people, first of all, people were home and desperate to have something nostalgic, I think. And also, no one had seen a lot of these photos, ever. And there's not a lot available from that era in general, there was no, like I said, cell phone, social media, digital cameras. It took a very concerted effort to document anything. So there's maybe writing, maybe poetry, maybe a film here or there, or a small homemade thing, but unless you were shooting film and then deciding to print and deciding to share, there's nothing. So very shortly after, a gallery reached out and said, we want a solo show, which I surprised myself and said yes to. And, you know, shortly after the solo show in San Francisco, which was an amazing experience, like a high school reunion, is what it felt like. Everybody showed up and took photos of themselves in front of their basically baby photos on the wall. And within a few months, I was solicited by a gallery in Berlin who said, we want a large solo show next summer. So that was December. And they wanted this large solo show, about 100 images, to kick off Pride in Germany. I surprised myself and said yes. And within a few weeks of that, they said, and we want a book. Can you do a book? I'm like, I can't do a book in a few months, and it was holiday. So she's like, we're gonna have you do a book, but we'll call you in February because everything's shutting down right now. It's like December, January. And I'm like, yeah, because we have just time now to not do anything, to have a book and a 100-image solo show available by end of May. So end of February, they reached out and said, we have a publisher, Hatschekans in Berlin. They'll do the book and they'll have it ready by April. So February, March. It was about a 2.5 month production schedule. And so like all the Lufthansa Airlines advertisements of showing like German model of efficiency and work ethic flashed before my eyes, and I'm like, okay, we can do this. If they can do this, I'll do it. So I basically woke up at 4:30 in the morning, at the beginning, before my day started and before their day ended in Berlin. We would Zoom, share, decide, send imagery, edit, FedEx things back and forth. It was such a short timeline. I had to, as I made prints, I had to mail it to them for them to prep and work with. So during that time, it was working on the show, presenting, editing, preparing the book, reaching out to writers, Anna Joy, Lainey Breedlove, Kathy Opie, and talking with them about content and what I wanted the text to be and how they could complement each other. And managed to get it in, but get them everything they needed by May. Early May, end of April.
You'd mentioned when we spoke that like somehow fairy dust had been like sprinkled on the project or something. I keep thinking about decades of making, and then you mentioned, you're like moving the boxes from one place to another, and then all of a sudden this serendipitous alchemistic thing happens and you're able to follow through. I have to say that like in my job as a photo editor, photographers are wonderful and amazing. Not always the most consistent or disciplined. And I swear, sometimes in working with you, I was like, I feel like I am the flaky artist here. Like, a month, 2 months would go by and I'm like, anyway. So, you have a tremendous sense of discipline. And I think that, that's what's required to be able to, produce at this level, but also what's amazing to me is that the speed did not affect the quality. Like, I think that so many times when we're rushing towards a deadline, inevitably things can fall apart, or we just kind of like, oh, it's good enough, it'll have to do. But I feel like you managed to really make this, phenomenal book. It's historic, that is, I think incredibly important, and I think it will continue to be. So I'm just, essentially just giving you your props, because I am very impressed with not only the work, but the discipline that it took to create it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too is curious about, what do you imagine, or so taking it back, you probably didn't imagine or that you'd be here in this scenario, but maybe you kind of did, because you were telling me when you were growing up, your family is in the arts world, that you grew up in galleries and that kind of thing. That might have affected your ability to imagine or see what's possible. So I'm a little curious about your upbringing in the arts world, and then of course this question that I asked you, how did your family feel when you came out? And you said, it'd be weirder if I wasn't gay. So I guess I'm just kind of curious about a little bit about your background, if you could tell us a little more.
Yeah. So, coming out certainly was, so there's clearly a very strong gay gene running through our lineage. So that was, I come from a progressive Jewish New York, Chicago family, where really it was quite uneventful. Coming out, if anything, preferred, I feel like. But also many people in my family are artists, painters, quite established, gallery showing painters and art collectors and directors and perform, a lot of art and design, which that I was exposed to growing up and going to galleries and seeing aunts and uncles' shows or my cousins' movies, or so yes, in many ways it. My expectation for kind of perfection or for striving was always present. I always thought, okay, if I'm gonna shoot, my stuff needs to be in a gallery. I was never, wondering where this would ever end up in many ways, even if it took if I took a hiatus. And my dad was a great photographer, street photographer. So in many ways, I even look back at some of his images and find that mine reflect his style, his composition, his use of light. And to this day, even for the book, I would send him edits. And I was like, what do you think? Pick between these, and he would send me things back. So and my family has been truly my biggest collectors and supporters since I was making these and making C prints and selling them in the 90s even, or having small shows then. So yeah, I guess to answer.
And one of the things too that I think is, in terms of the rhythm of life, motherhood clearly also affected your practice, and I think that that's worth acknowledging and addressing. I'm curious about how you continued to, how you remained creative in this period when you were also raising another human being.
So it's hard, and I'm not sure I did. And so when my daughter was born, it was also the transition from film to digital, which was challenging for me and for a lot of people, but I'm not a techie. So all of a sudden, what I knew to be kind of this tactile art form of film, a manual camera, processing my own film, printing my own film, working with the paper itself, was dying. Labs were closing, people were hoarding film. There's the Fuji and Kodak are shutting their factory door. It was hard and confusing, and the new digital cameras sucked. And no one knew how to print, even if they were able to shoot on a camera. like no one quite knew where to go with it. And my daughter was born, and so everything, it was kind of this perfect storm of packing up for a bit. So a lot of my stuff, so I even actually tried to salvage some of my early digital camera images, and they're bad. They're really hard. I mean, you can have terrible film and still make it work, but terrible early digital, and there's just like, it's hopeless.
Oh, it's true.
So
you were also a photo editor at Jones, right?
Yes, so I did. I kind of segued from just scrambling. So, you know, with a kid, it's like a hustle to do this kind of work. And it was hard. And I had business cards and, you know, flyers and websites and like tried everything. I was doing some wedding photography, some family photography, some assisting. And finally I was like, you know what? I'm going into an office. I'm getting some pay and I'm getting some benefits. So I started photo editing, which I absolutely loved actually, for Mother Jones. And then the magazine started transitioning to digital for the first time. And so magazines were like, we're folding, we don't have money, we don't know how to do this. And so again, it was this kind of, you know, it was like just such a shift in tools and progress, really. And, you know, we had to figure out how to keep up. And so again, so I left the magazine as they were kind of filtering. They've continued, but there was a while where everyone was laid off and they were like, we're doing what we can to stay alive. We're certainly not running photo stories. And so I kind of just, didn't do. I stepped away, really. I took pictures here and there, but it's really hard once, you know, then I had a house and I had a kid and pets and like it's really hard to find time to be creative. I mean, it's like what we said, why, you know, like Sally Mann, her work became her family, and it's not uncommon to just kind of shift to the inner.
Yeah, I think what struck me about the story, what I loved about it though, is that indeed it was your daughter who
that's right.
Dusted off the negatives and got you to rethink and understand the work through a new prism, and
that's right.
Gave you the energy back, kind of, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Help
that's
propel
true.
all this forward. I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. I do have one more question. My last question.
Yeah.
Is, you know, because there aren't very many representations and images, like your photographs are quite unique. You'd mentioned to me how you felt like you became an overnight torchbearer. And I'm curious about, you know, your art and your activism, and in light of all this, like, how do you feel about that? And this question of being an overnight torchbearer, what does that mean to you?
Well, so since the book has come out, I receive messages, emails, texts, any form of contact that is possible from people, young people, old people, people from, so on my way here, someone messaged me saying, your book has arrived in Saudi Arabia. Me and my girlfriend are trying to get out and going to the Netherlands. So like, but thank you for the inspiration. You know, so I've become this point person from my humble little home to feeling like this international reference point that people contact either for you know, to thank me or to say I feel seen, I feel represented, I'm inspired, this is exciting, I had no idea anyone lived before us, you know? So I feel like I'm holding this kind of historical treasure almost, that this is all, in some ways, all we have to show this thriving, really at the begin, like this gender non-conforming group before there was language to talk about what that means, like there is today. We just were inventing it and supporting each other in our preferences and thriving and living this really beautiful communal, collective, creative life, and kind of reinventing. Like San Francisco in the 90s was in contrast to the 70s and 80s, like lesbian scene, say. People were really kind of radically claiming butch femme identities and really in opposition to what had been accepted, you know, like really breaking new territory with that. And again, I feel like in many ways, it was the beginning of a lot of the language and the familiarity we have today. And so I think kids today are like, wow, we didn't even know there were like, that existed before us. And that is the beauty of youth. Is that just kind of having the opportunity to see your, you know, I think humans crave a sense of like an identity through their past, through their foremothers and forefathers, and for queers it's a little bit harder because sure you have your birth family, but for other identities, if you're not religious and tapping into like religious history as kind of a sense of identity and helping to make sense of who you are, where do you go? So, you know, I think that is what's unfolded a bit is people even from my age who were like, I didn't live in San Francisco in the 90s, but you know, I watched, or I was coming out then, or this feels really exciting or empowering to see. So it's very moving. You know, and I always reply to people. I always answer, I always at least acknowledge them because equally, I'm kind of amazed that the book has been as well received as it's been. And even, you know, again, internationally, when the book came out, I think there were 1,500 prints made. And before it released in the US, they were already planning a second print because we were low a month and a half later, which was shocking. So.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for giving me this space to talk with you tonight.
Thank you.
I really want to encourage questions from the audience. Like I said, we just skimmed the surface, and so please, there's a mic. Don't be shy.
What did it feel like when you first stepped out of the plane, I guess, and got to San Francisco? Like, what was it like getting into that environment?
Good question. So, what got me to San Francisco was, you know, I had never been, and I had read Hothead Paisan, a zine that I probably got at Powell's Books or something, some little bookstore, and there was a little zine called Mudflap, which was this badass bike messenger chick who spun around, you know, like rode around San Francisco, and I was like, I want to be that cartoon. Like whatever that cartoon is, I want to find that life, which was ironic because it may never have existed, but I decided that it was real, and lucky for me, it basically was. So I came to San Francisco, ready and eager to get a bike messenger job, went down one weekend to like hop around an interview, and found Lynn Breedlove, who at the time had Lickety Split Bike Messenger Company, and was like, you know, of course, it was like Messenger. So like, interviews were insane chaos, and she was just like answering pagers and phones and walkie-talkies, and was like, yeah, and come back next week and we'll give you something. So, and in the meantime, go check out my friend's cafe, the Bearded Lady Cafe, which had maybe wasn't quite open. They had not finished siphoning their electricity from the street. And so I walked in, and there was Silas Howard and Harry Dodge and Lori Hartman, and I was like, I'm never leaving this city. I went home, packed up, and had Tanya move me down a week later. And that was that. I basically, you know, San Francisco, kind of like New York, especially in the Mission, had this great, you know, it's urban, it's gritty, it was, my first place was maybe $250 for my room in the Mission, in a flat. So it was fun, and there were young people, and you know, it was just like pulsing with energy and excitement.
That's lovely. I'm glad you got to like experience that when it happened.
Yeah.
At the start of that.
Yes. Yeah.
Editing this in 3 months seems like an absolute feat. Like, could you speak more to the process?
It was an absolute insane experience. And so, as Noelle said, I'm pretty obsessive and organized. And so, I have to say though, I was working with work that I was so familiar with and have had access to for all these years. So it's different, I think it was different than if I was creating work and creating a book, either simultaneously or shortly before. So I had this cellular sense of the work, but every move I made, I didn't have like an assistant. Every move I made was another Google search. How to scan 35 to 30. What do you, like, Photoshop, how to change the color from, so it was painstaking. And what finally saved me, okay, so that said, the people that stepped into my life, or that somehow got into my realm that I knew were incredible and can-do people, I basically was like, do not leave me right now. So, you know, if I, you know, help me with this press release, or help me with this layout, and so I formed this really incredible group of women and people who had, you know, were just kind of feeding me what I needed as I needed it. And I found Light Source Lab in San Francisco and just started, and I said, can I basically move in for the next 2 months and bring all my negatives and just start drum scanning and working in Photoshop, having someone else drive and sit there and get the images. So I had match prints from yellow edged match prints from the 90s, still amazingly. And I would put them on the wall. We would bring a negative in, try to get Photoshop and the printer to match my match print, which for each image was at least 12 hours effort. And often I would do an image, go that far, and was like, no, not making the cut. Like, it's just, no, it's not going in. And I would bring them home, and I would have my partner, I was like, these three are different. And he's like, how are they different? I'm like, there's more yellow, can you not see that? Like, got really, really obsessive. So it was just like racing in circles to the lab, to home, to my day job that I was more and more basically using up all my sick and vacation time for this. And, you know, multitasking. So I would grab an edit, send it to 4 different people and say, and find the common interest, post on Instagram and see the response. lay a book out from the front of my house to the back of my house and try not to get the pets to reverse the order on accident, but kind of lay it out, put pages together that I thought worked together, tape things on the walls, learn things like headbands and tailbands in a book. Who knew? There's headbands and tailbands, and you have to pick the color. But all that mattered to me, so I was like, don't just put any color in there. I am picking the color of the headband and tailband. So, like, the design aspect of the book making was amazing to have the opportunity to be a part of. And shoes, I wouldn't have minded a little more time, but it just was, it was basically a 24/7 process for 2 months. Very little sleep and engaging as many people to help, and in the end, using essentially everything I had ever learned was like culminating in this. Anything I knew from printing, from art school, from, you know, my exposure to growing up in an art and design world. To photo editing. Yeah, photo editing, actually. Yeah. And great advice I got was keep it tight edit, less is more. And it felt, so some people were like, coffee table book, go for hundreds of images. And I would, first of all, there was not time. But also, I wanted to create almost like a snow globe. Like a book that you felt you could look at from beginning to end and get lost in and be immersed in and come to the end, like get all the way through in one sitting and feel moved by. And I have, you know, another part of this process was buying about 3,000 photo books for reference. Any book I saw at a store I would look at and pull for ideas for size, choosing the size, the paper weight, the size of the image, whether to bleed the image, everything. I was just soaking in from books and references that I liked. But a lot of books felt big, and I wanted, so just as far as kind of design choice, I wanted something I could hold, and also that I didn't stop halfway through kind of exhausted. So I tried books, and I was like, okay, I'm done at page 70, I'm done. My eyes are tired. So things like that, I was like, that's the length. So,
I have so many questions, so I'm just going to try to get one or two
Okay.
out there. So you arrived not knowing people, and then you fell into you just fell into the scene.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of other scenes going on in San Francisco at that time, but you fell into this one particular scene. How, as you got to know the people and became friends and lovers and allies and enemies and the drama of which side you wear the flower on for the femmes, how did that affect how you would take photos, or what you would shoot? That's the part A of that.
Okay.
The part B, I'm lying, I'm just trying to shove in more stuff. The part B of that, I think, is in the intimacy of knowing people or not knowing people, did the formats ever change? Like, you're like, I want to try shooting on a Diana,
Yeah.
Did you start changing formats to play with stuff, or did you find like home sweet home in certain cameras?
So I'll start with part B. I always loved a 35mm camera, and I shot 35mm film. Sure, I was in school, I had toy cameras, I tried square format, I had large format. 35mm for me, for documentary and kind of street photography, it's agile, it's easy, it's unassuming, and love that's how I saw. And once I started seeing in that format and composing in that format, full frame, that was that. The change that I would say did happen at the beginning was I started with black and white. And shortly after, and you can see black and white in the book, of course, most of those are very early on. Shortly after, I realized I'm missing so much of this world in black and white because it was the era of manic panic hair dye, and everybody's bedrooms were like pink or purple or like neon, and it was so colorful that the loss of that, it made sense to start shooting color. And I loved to print color. I had a black and white darkroom in our basement, but so that was easy. I could do it from home, but I also had access to the school, San Francisco Art Institute printing lab, so I could spend hours on it and print in color there. As far as people, I would say yes, I lucked out finding and also helping to form like a very particularly warm, welcoming group in particular. And San Francisco was so big, but there were these concentric circles of groups where there were close people, different groups. That the beauty of a large community, like a family, is there can be sub-worlds within this huge world. So sure, I had my immediate friends and family that for whatever reason, whether they were roommates or whatever reason, they were always my closest. That grew exponentially, but so photographically, I photographed a lot, and the images that skimmed to the top that appeal to me as far as composition or just work as an image for me are usually the people I was around the most, because thus photographing the most, thus have a larger pool to choose from. There were a lot of images as I was going through, a lot of people that I was like, did not know by name, but would have recognized, but I wasn't around them enough to kind of really get a spectacular image that felt worthy of a book. Yeah.
We have time for like one or two more kind of quick ones, so.
Mine was very simple. It continued on with the design of the book. So why this photo on the cover?
So the photo on the cover, I had a few options, and hanging, looking, trying to decide. One of the reasons for this photo was the color felt really arresting and unique and kind of encompassed. For one, I love the richness of the green, just worked for me. Another reason was I liked the eye contact and the feeling of, it was almost like, come along, come for this ride, come for this journey, like let's go, like hop in, and we'll see what this is, So that, it was kind of like a welcome into the book, having the eye contact. But it was hard. Like down to the wire, I was kind of like, there were a few that could have worked, and again, asking people, and in the end, the graphic designer for the publisher put this together, and I was like, the way that there was space for the writing and space for the subtitle, so we went with that.
I found your work because I'm working on a book that's like a history of non-binary identity, and my reporting led me back to this moment in time, and like, you're really not overstating things when you say there's almost no visual representation of this scene at all. I was so excited when I found your work. But my question was, like, you said that it really felt like you were in a moment where like you were making a new thing, but then you also said something like, oh, we were aware of like the other older thing that we were sort of distancing ourselves from or like in reaction to. Can you talk a little bit about just like, what was your awareness of like lesbian San Francisco older than you, and like, were you in contact with people of that generation? Like, what were the things you were pushing against? Like, I'm just very curious of like, because there's all these layers of gay scenes existing in San Francisco at the same time, which is sort of rare.
So yeah, I would say, so I think every generation takes aspects from the generation before them, uses some, and creates their own world that works for them. And so, all due respect to everyone before us that brought us to where we were able to be in, early 90s. We also didn't relate as as the kids these days may not relate. It's like you keep moving forward and making changes and adding your own flair. And so sure, so I came down from Portland, directly from Portland at the time to San Francisco. And it was not, so it was a far more traditional scene that I didn't relate to at all. And so when I came to San Francisco, but they were friends, it's not like, it was just like, that's not my attraction, that's not my aesthetic, it's not my art, it's not, it wasn't gelling. But in San Francisco, yeah, there were, people coexist. But I think, for instance, the possible, I wouldn't say conflict, but the kind of butting up against generations. So Tribe 8, a band that Lynn Breedlove, as you may know, sang for, a super radical band. And my band, Cypher in the Snow, at the time were invited to Michigan Women's Music Festival, which is a long-standing women's land festival in the summer, right? Music festival. We were basically booed off stage and driven out of town for being offensive. And we were like, we're feminists, we're not, we're just doing it our own way. And people were offended and mortified, and we were emulating male, like it was an intense moment and clash of like old and new in a lot of ways, or maybe not even old and new, but what we were doing and what they had in many ways felt that they had fought so hard for. Like, they were like, we are claiming our own identities here on this land, and we should have like screwed that up in their minds. So that's an example of, I think, how different it felt to be like raucous a little bit and forming our own path with kind of non-conforming gender choices. Yeah. Another question?
We're about
One
at
more?
time, but we can
Oh.
do one more to kind of wrap up if there's someone who has one.
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk about, was there a moment where you went from like, I'm communicating with my community in the here and now, I'm going to galleries, I'm showing my friends their work, I'm showing some of the other concentric circles, the work, to going to, I think I'm documenting something for the future, but also the feeling of, I'm documenting something that may be fleeting. And was there a moment, because there's so many transitions that you've made, right? From the culture changing, the technology changing, magazines changing. Is there a moment where it went from like, this is growing, to this may be growing, but it also may be a moment?
So reflecting back on the time, I am not sure I or anyone ever felt like it would ever end until it ended. And until the late 90s, when people started moving away, having families, wanting larger houses, coming to LA or New York, housing became very challenging to afford if you weren't, you know, a lot of people were forced out of San Francisco financially. And so only in the early 2000s was I like, whoa, okay, we're dispersing. It's disappearing as we knew it. I'm not sure I did much with that thought other than, you know, like when you graduate college. Like it very much felt like a college campus at the time, in a way. We're all there, it's small, we're all arms, you know, kind of engaging with each other and inspiring each other. And really it wasn't until this new exposure to the work with Instagram in recent years and the book that the significance of this work being such a historic body, you know, a historic canon of rarely able to be found images, it's new, my understanding of this work as an element of history. And this book as kind of you know, a new reference point for people. So yeah, I was not aware the whole time. I was always aware I wanted to expose like the beauty that I saw in this fringe community of like DIY like underdogs, but not, I didn't realize until now how important having done that was.
Chloe and Noelle, thank you both for doing this.
Thank you.